Okay, there's been some question on we'll talk about how to tame down a heli so that they fly like the 200 SRX, and I didn't know the best way to try and explain this without just taking some time and putting it on a whiteboard and trying to explain how a rate works or how an Expo functions. And I think the best way to do that is to go ahead and put it on a whiteboard and show it on a chart. Finless Bob explained this one time, and once I saw it on a whiteboard, it was pretty cut and dry to me. So this is how this works. So if you'll pretend that this center point right here is the center position of the servo, this would be the position when you're not touching your input sticks at all. Your servo will be at a center point. Now, as you move the servo, or move your stick to, say, the right, your aileron stick to the right, your servo will reach a max travel limit of 100%. That means that once it hits that end over there, it's reached 100% of its servo travel. With that being said, halfway through a right stick movement, you would reach a 50% of your total servo travel. Now, if you're going to make an aileron movement to the left, then you would hit a negative 50% and a negative 100%. So in this case, your servo is traveling the full extent that it can possibly move. Now, when your servo is doing this, then your helicopter, so far as its cyclic inputs, or its aileron roll or its elevator, it is getting the greatest movement that it can possibly get. In other words, it's going to bank really hard right, or it's going to bank really hard left to its full extreme. And so the way that a rate works, and sometimes rate is referred to as weight or servo weight. And all that is, it's a percentage of the total servo travel. So with that being said, if I wanted to tame down the roll of my helicopter, then I want to limit the maximum amount of travel that the servo can make. So instead of traveling, let me erase these numbers right here. I don't want my board to fall over. Let's say instead of traveling 100%, I only want my servo to travel 50% of its total travel distance. So this would be 50 and negative 50. That means it has half of its travel movement. Which means at its normal half stick position it's 25 and negative 25. So here, if I take my transmitter and I move my stick all the way to the right, I'm only going to be letting the servo move 50%. If I move it all the way to the left, I'm only going to allow my servo to travel 50% of its maximum total range. Now, when you do this, you tame down a helicopter extremely, because what you're essentially doing is you're not allowing it to roll as far left or as far right. Okay, so this is how a rate works. So on the 200 SRX, there's a couple of things that happen in its flight modes. Now, I don't know that the FBL is programmed that it's not really programmed on a rate function. It's really not. The FBL is actually programmed on the amount of sensitivity to the gyro movement, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's just deal with the rates right now. So when you're setting up your transmitter, like in your DX6i, and you're setting up your dual rates, you can add a percentage value up here, and that's the percentage that you're adding in there. If you have one of your rates set at 50%, that means your servo can travel half of its distance. Or if you set it at 75, it can travel 3/4 of its distance. This would be a very tame setting, so let's just say this could be rate 1. I grabbed that bad marker again. Dual rate 1. This will be a tame mode. Now if I wanted to add another rate in here, where this is my 0, I can add a rate in here and call this 75, negative 75, which in your transmitter is just going to be 75. You won't have the option for negative 75 unless you're programming like an OpenTX radio, where I can set my rates in a curve function, but that's something totally different. Okay, so in this case, this would be like dual rate number 2. So now I'm getting 75% of my servo travel. So this would be like a beginner, an intermediate, and if I wanted to go all out with it, I could have my 0 position here and do 100. And then I've got full travel again. So when I flip a switch, I can go from half of my servo travel to 75% of my servo travel, and again to 100% of my servo travel. And this is how a rate works. So now I'm going to tell you how Expo works. So give me just 1 second. I'm going to erase this, and we'll talk about how Expo works. Okay, so now we're going to look at how Expo works, and I drew a little chart here so that we can explain it. Now what I want you to remember is that this point right here is going to be the center point of our servo travel. This is, again, when the stick is in dead center and not moving anywhere. In other words, there's my full right or full left, but at dead center, without the stick moving, this is where we find ourselves at 0. Now with Expo, I want you to remember that we're going to get to the same place at the same time. In other words, when I move my stick fully to the right, I'm still going to travel this whole distance from 0 to servo max. Okay? What Expo does is it controls this. Just for our eye's sake, let's pretend that this point here is max travel. Now the way that the transmitter works without any Expo is I have a linear growth between my 0 center stick and my max travel. Okay, so in other words, I get to my maximum travel point by equal movement of the stick all the way up. What Expo does is it softens the stick movement around the center of the servo, so that if you're hand fisting this thing and you're just jamming the sticks left and right, to try to control your roll, it softens the center of that stick so that you don't over control the helicopter. But keep in mind that full stick movement is still going to eventually yield full servo travel. So what Expo does is this. This is the center of your stick. Expo goes, okay, he's moved the stick this much, but I'm only going to allow the servo to move this much. And so what it does is it exponentially grows up till it reaches the max. So you can see what it's doing here is, if this is my stick movement, and this is my servo movement, with no Expo, my servo movement is in direct correlation to my stick movement when I'm not using Expo. When I'm adding Expo, the amount of stick movement that I'm making is greater than the amount of servo travel. See here, it softens it around the center, but it eventually gets to the same point. So if I'm running, for instance, if my Expo equals 0, this is what I've got. If I want to tame my helicopter down so that I don't have as much severe servo movement around center stick, I could add 10. percent expo, these are in percentages, generally, 20, or 30. You can make them any number that you want. But here's what I like to do. I like to put my greater expo rates at my highest DR rates. And then as my dual rate decreases, I also decrease my expo, so that if I was running a dual rate of 100 on servo weight, I would be running a smaller expo factor of, say, 0. If I was running 75% servo weight, 10% expo. If I was running, let's say 60%, 20% expo, and if you want to go this low, 50%. Which I'm telling you what, on a CP helicopter, just like the 130X and some 450s, you'd be surprised if you lower this servo weight down to 50% and up the expo to about 30. You tame the helicopter down so much it almost feels like you're flying something like the 200X. So when we talk about taming down our programming in our transmitter, this is exactly how it's done. I'm increasing the expo, and I'm decreasing the amount of servo travel. And that's how you do it. And by doing that, you make the helicopter extremely stable. You limit its ability to move, basically. And you can also do that a little bit with a swash ring, but that's a little more complicated when you adjust your swash ring, and we'll just let that go at that. But anyway, by adjusting your expo and your rates, you can really tame down a helicopter. The other thing that we talked about briefly is the FBO unit. Now, we sometimes talk about adjusting the gains in the FBO unit. And so if you could just picture a bubble level, like you would see on any carpenter level, it's got its little lines here that let you know it's centered, and then you have the little bubble. So the way an FBO unit works is when this bubble unit right here tilts one way or the other, and or the MEMS gyro. Let me actually make it tilt a little bit. It doesn't have to be a MEMS gyro, but that has been the most popular. When it notices that it's tilting one way or the other, and this bubble travels up here, it sends a signal to the FBO unit, and it says, hey, I'm leaning to the right. I need to add some left cyclic. So what happens is the FBL sends a signal to the servo, and the servo actually adjusts itself from its known position now. It's not level to the ground. It's from its known position when you initialize the FBO unit. So if you initialize the FBO unit like right here, and it's sitting up, it will try to go back to where its known position is. So that's why you want to do it on a flat surface. But it's going to try to return back to its known position. And it's going to do that by feeding the servo travel. Now here's the thing. When you adjust the gain, you essentially tell the FBO unit how much correction you want it to give to the servo travel. So if it recognizes that this bubble is way up here and I have the gain setting high, I may tell the helicopter to don't make an adjustment to the servo until my bubble is this far out. Alright? And this would be a very low gain setting. Whereas if I tell the FBO unit to, okay, make an adjustment when you notice the bubble is this far out. Now that's not very far out of level. So if I tell my gain setting to make an adjustment when the bubble is out this far, then it's going to correct any time it sees the helicopter move one way or the other, just a fraction, and this would be considered a very high gain setting. And so when you up the gain on the 200 SRX or any FBL unit, you're telling it to make a correction anytime it notices a slight change in the attitude of the helicopter from its initialization attitude. And so that's what it's trying to do. And so when you up the gain setting, you're doing this. When you lower the gain setting, you're doing this. This makes a helicopter fly tame because it adds more control into the computer and it requires less stick input from you. This requires more stick input from you because it has less input from the FBL unit. And so that's how the gain settings work. Now here's the deal. If you get the gain setting too high, then it's going to try to make a correction anytime it sees the helicopter twitch. So if you got the helicopter with the vibration in it, like this, well, that gyro is trying to correct for every bit of the vibration that it's feeling. So what's it doing? The servos are always chasing themselves around in circles, and that's why you sometimes get that head wobble that you'll see in a 200 or any helicopter. For instance, if this was a helicopter tail, and I had my gyro setting set too high, then it's going to constantly try to correct for any vibration it feels in the tail, and it's going to start working itself, and that's where you get the tail wobble. And then you turn the gain down and it locks the tail in because it's not trying to detect as much tail movement. The same thing is happening with the cyclic gains with an FBL. So I hope that answers a little bit of the questions on what the rates are and what Expo is and what your cyclic gain is. And how adjusting the gain in the FBL unit, raising the gain values, tames the helicopter down, dropping the gain values, makes the helicopter more responsive. It also shows how reducing your rate by 50% or your servo weight, the servo weight and the rate are the same thing. So if I make my weight 50% of its 100%, then I've taken the travel in half, and my helicopter can't pitch as much left or right, forward or back. If that's how the rate works at the Expo. Just simply says how quick do I get to that end movement. How much stick input yields how much servo movement. As my Expo increases, the amount of stick movement to get to my end travel also increases. As my Expo decreases, the amount of stick movement to get to end travel also decreases. You're still getting to the same spot. You're still going to reach that maximum servo travel. It's just how quickly it gets there. So hopefully that explains it. And my video is not too terrible. Any questions, just hit me back. Okay, so I got the 130X out. I've got the 130X out and I'm fixing to shoot a video on how the tail is, but I thought I would go through something real quick. I've got my rate set up right here on the 130. It's just 3 position switch, so I've got high rate, I got low rate, high rate, medium rate. Okay? And I want to show you here on my program screen how that affects the servo travel real quick. Alright, so I'm just going to exit out of here, go into my outputs menu. Here you can see my outputs, and what I want you to take a look at is I'm going to move my aileron right now. If you notice I move my aileron, I'm getting almost 90% travel as I move my stick. Back out so you can see my stick movement. So you move my stick, almost 90% travel. That's where I've got my maximum rate on my 130 set at 90%. And you can see there where it's hitting. Alright, now when I take my rate down one click, look at my percentage. 80%, because I've got my medium rate set at 80%. Alright, That means the servo is only traveling 80% of its travel distance. When I take it down all the way, if you look at my servo travel, it's about 45%. It's very, very low. And I do this because on the 130X, when I'm taking off, it's a little bit touchy with the FBO unit. So when I'm close to the ground, I like to have my rate setting really low. And so that actually tames the helicopter down when it's close to the ground. When I'm wanting to go into doing some 3D and more aerobatics, I bring it on up. Basically, when I get off the ground, I bring my rates up to high rates for me. But I want to show you what it's like in its low rate setting. And I want to also show you the tail. There were some questions about which tail I'm running. This is the Linux tail. The only reason I put this tail on was because I had bought it and it had good bearings in it. My stock tail bearings went out and I didn't have a replacement set, and rather than taking the bearings out of this Linux tail, I went ahead and just switched the whole tail box out. And it flies really good. I do have a little dab of CA right there on the end of where this gear meets the torque tube shaft, and it keeps it from making, if you can see these little lines in this collar, this is caused when that torque tube shaft slides back, because it can free float in there and hits the daggum shaft collar, and that causes a vibration and will actually cause the tail to twitch. And so by putting the CA on there, it helped get rid of my tail twitch. That's all it did. So I'll show you guys how this works. Alright, so I'm just going to initialize the 130, flip my throttle hold on. I'm not going to run the canopy here. I just don't want to put it on right now. Alright, spool it up. Got a little bit of the air conditioning vent again, but as you can see, it's just as smooth as it can be. I'm not gonna do any crazy pitch jumps in here. I'm in a pretty tight spot. If it wasn't dark, it's been real windy too here in Kuwait. So as you can see, tail holds really good, and heck, this is flying at a lower rate. It's at that 45% rate and a 10% expo. So you can see it's really docile with those settings. Now it can get away from you, but as far as how smooth it flies, you can see. Alright. Oh, if you want to see I'll toss it into idle up. So you can see that even at higher RPM head speed, definitely more responsive than the idle up with a higher head speed, but the tail is still just as solid as it can be. I was trying to pitch jump it real quick, but there it is.